2, 3, 4. Times roll. We gonna stay here with soothe our soul if it takes all night long. Come on and let the good times roll. We gonna stay here with soothe our soul if it takes all night long. Evening sun is sinking low, clock in the wall said it's time to go. I got plans, baby, plans for you. I'm gonna tell y'all this is what we're gonna do. We're gonna get in the groove and let the good times roll. We gonna stay here with soothe our soul if it takes all night long. Come on and let the good times roll. We gonna stay here with soothe our soul if it takes all night long. Might be 12 o'clock, it might be 3. Time don't mean that much to me. Ain't felt this good since I don't know him. Don't know, baby, when I'm gonna feel this good again. Getting the groove and let the good times roll. We gonna stay here with soothe our soul if it takes all night long. Come on and let the good times roll. We gonna stay here with soothe our soul if it takes all night long. All night, 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 baby, all night long. Get in the groove and let the good times roll. We gonna stay here with soothe our soul if it takes all night long. First of all, thank you, and thank you for coming out tonight for this wonderful event at the Hamtramck Public Library. I must confess, well, before a few days ago, I had never even set foot in this place. And when I walked in, I was just blown away by the diversity, the nationalities, the energy, the children, and the fine staff who work here. So let's give it up for the Hamtramck Public Library, first and foremost, for even having this. When the Swan sings on Hastings, it has a long history. And the funny part of it is, I don't like calling folks out, but one of the people who planted the seed in my head is here. I learned about Hastings basically from my dad. My dad used to run the numbers. For those of you who don't know what the numbers are, we now have the Lotto, we have Keno. In those days they did not. So there was this underground gambling world going on. And the way the numbers were, well, one might say, well, how do we know that 275 is the winning number? Because it's pretty easy to lie. I mean, in Keno, all you got to do is look up on the screen. Well, they used the racetracks. Whatever horses came in first, second, or third is how they justified who won and who didn't win. So there's a lot of numbers running that comes out of this, because Hastings Street, which is in Paradise Valley, which basically you're talking Gratiot. Now, Hastings right now is I-75. It started around Gratiot, which is a little above what was considered Black Bottom. Black Bottom was below Gratiot, going toward the river. So Hastings ran from there all the way up basically until about the boulevard. Although as it got that far, it started to sort of peter out, so to speak. But it was bar after bar after barber shop after grocery store, and most of it was black owned, which was something kind of unique in America at the time. And it was a fascinating place for everyone. Black, white, it really didn't matter. You come down there, you want to listen to jazz, you want to listen to blues, you want to buy a girl. Yeah, we're not worried about kids. You want to buy something to smoke, you want to sit in an after hours place till 5, 6 in the morning and listen to great musicians who have been playing all night. Now they come down there to sort of hang out and still kick it a little. That's where you went. And a dear friend of mine, who is one of the greatest drummers in this city and probably in all of the United States, Mr. R.J. Spangler. Sorry, I have to. Hey, R.J., the man. He and I were sitting in the music menu. I almost called it I almost called it the Cozy Corner, which is one of the bars in this book. We were in the music menu, and Johnny Bassett, the guitar player who had played on Hastings Street, RJ was drumming for him. And we had a conversation, and I said, you know, I'd like to write this thing one of these days, and blah, 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 blah. And lo and behold, you know, you have these pipe dreams, and this is going to happen, and that's going to happen. Well, as time went on, I was working at Northern High School, teaching drama and English, and I decided, you know what? I am going to write the play for our class, because they said, oh, you got to put a play out. I said, okay, I'm going to write it. Because they said, oh, let's do this, let's do that. I said, nah, I'm going to write my own. So I wrote a one-act, and this is what it came out as. And then as time went on, I said, you know, you're going to reach more of an audience with a novel. You could be in China, you could be in Poland, Italy, wherever, South America, and you can buy the book. Well, you couldn't do that with a play unless you were there that day. So anyways, I wrote it into a novel, and it took numerous, numerous versions, and out it came. So Aquarius Publishing Company picked it up. They're a local, and I submitted it to them. I didn't hear from them for a long time, almost a year. And I'm thinking, that's over. Oh well, what am I going to do next? And out of nowhere, I get a text saying, we're going to do your play. I mean, we're going to publish your novel and blah, 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 and here it is. So by the grace of God, here it is. Okay, I think the best way to actually introduce this before I start reading is to kind of get a little feel of a little bit of the history of it. I'm not going to spend a long time on it. I know you came here to hear me read. Yeah, right. And not watch videos. But I think the video is really going to sort of plant the seed in what this was all about. Now, the opening scene you're going to see, some guy had an 8mm camera and was going around downtown in the mid-50s. And this is what you're going to see. And it's
Hastings Street Opera. Boys all down Hastings Street. Here in Hastings, the corner bar. That's the only bar you can walk in and get yourself a bottle of beer and turn your head and somebody else is trying to drink it up. Boy, that's a bad joint. Well, down the line, down Hastings Street. Palmer, Perry, Kirby, Frederick, Golden Bell across the street. That's the only place you walk in, you have to shovel the sawdust off the floor before you can buy yourself a drink. Hastings Street Opera. Well down Hastings Street. Farnsworth and Hastings. 1 Castle Theater, sleeping hours till 6 o'clock. Yes, yes. Oh, anything can happen on Hastings Street. Fiddle on Hastings, the Silver Grill. That's the only place you can walk in to buy a drink. You have to make the bartender and the owner drunk before you can get a drink. Yes. Warren Hastings, Hamtramck. Dale Smith's joint. Walk in and buy your bottle of beer and walk right out the south side door with a hamburger. Boston Hastings, Sonny Wilson, longest bar in town. That's the only bar you have to walk in when you get ready to buy a bottle of beer. You have to walk a mile after you get in the joint to get it. Across the street, Jake's bar, he got all the taste Sonny don't want. Garfield and Hastings, Mary's bar, 101 Wrench. That's the only bar you can fight all you want to fight, nobody run out. Canfield and Hastings, Mike Fall, last stop. Willis and Hastings, the Willis Theater. That's the only picture show in town. If you missed a picture 50 years ago, you can see it at the Willis Theater. Right now, it's showing Rudolph Valentino in the Lost World. Shapiro, Alexandrine, the Cozy Corner, formerly owned by Mike Ira, now owned by Malone. Malone ain't hired nobody. He's a bartender, he's a porter, and a owner and everything. Joe's Tap Room, old folks home. That's the only bar in town where the ladies can walk in and buy a bottle of beer, and they'll give them a dip of snuff. Yes, that's Hastings Street Opera. Going on down Hastings now. Dixie Bar, one way out, never go in that joint. Leland Hastings. Leland Bar, that's the only bar in town where the bartenders carry pistols. And when they serve you, they say, have you got any money? You say, yes. Well, you please pay them. Illinois, Livingston Hastings, Miss Rice's Fish House. You can smell that fish clean in Los Angeles, California, boy. You tell us, please. All down the line. That's the only place in town where you can buy a steak sandwich and it'll taste like fish. They cook everything in Miss Rice's in the same grease. Ace House. Rain Hastings, filling station, gas, 25 cents a gallon. 90-cent tax. Mac and Hastings, sell the digs, fuel home. If you can't get a bottle, go somewhere and snatch one. Across the street, Joe's Record Shop. He's got everybody in there except for T-bone steak. Down Hastings Street, Elliot. Then Hastings Street Bar. That's the only place where the bartenders shoot everybody in there after 2 o'clock. Castle Theater, sleeping hours till 5 o'clock in the morning, and please don't bother our rats. Washington Hastings, People's Bar, owned by Little Dave Open. Boy, that joint should kill. That's the only joint where the customer jump over the bar and get 2 pistols and run everybody out of Detroit. Hastings Street Opera, on down the line. Wilkins, Brewster, 3-star bar to call the fire department to put the band on the bandstand. Alfred and Hastings, Kislow's joint, better known as Brown's Bar. That's the only joint you can walk in on the Hastings Street side and run like hell coming back out on the Hastings Street side. Head Tavern, old folks home. That's the only bar in town where they serve drinks free to everybody that's 102 years old, accompanied by their mother and father. Well down Hastings Street. Blue Heaven, that's the only joint you walk in, you have to duck and crawl on your knees to buy yourself a bottle of beer. Arcade Theater, Brown Highway, Big Top Hamburger Stand. All down the line, Strode Brewing Company, 40 Reed's Pocket. 40 all-the-rage music bar, boy. Anything you have now. That's the only bar in town that when you go in to buy yourself a drink, you must hold on to your pocketbook very tight. One of you plays that yourself. So that's all. That's all of Hastings Street Opera.
Detroit, 1956. Oh, the cars were rolling off the assembly line. Jobs were plentiful. And some great music was being created and performed in a district called Paradise Valley. The valley's main artery, Hastings Street, was the center of it all. Man, you could get anything on Hastings Street, so they said. Well, Paradise Valley was this exciting collage of culture, that being jazz and blues. Of course, there was vice, illegal numbers running, after-hours joints where the blues greats like John Lee Hooker and jazz giants like Dizzy Gillespie would often play until well into the morning hours. Its businesses were mainly black-owned and, well, man, everyone seemed to look out for one another. However, all that changed when urban renewal, or slum renewal as some called it, had caused Paradise Valley to become obliterated and replaced by a ditch, and the ditch turned into a freeway, I-75. Well, this is a fictional account of this historical community that was forced to recreate itself and to relocate in an age of racial segregation. When the Swan Sings on Hastings, a journey through the underbelly of Paradise Valley. Oh, its circle of musicians, the numbers runners, the hustlers, the business owners. And let's not forget the everyday inhabitants. All these people struggling to deal with the loss of their beloved neighborhood. When the Swan Sings on Hastings. That's our beautiful city, ladies and gentlemen. That is our beautiful city, Detroit. Okay, let's get on with the reading. I hope you really enjoyed that, because you really get to see Detroit like we never knew it, you know, and all this stuff going on now, which is fine and good. I'm not knocking it. You'll never get back to that stuff. That was a one-time only performance that, rightfully so, is now in the history books. So I would like to open with the actual opening of the novel, which is the prologue. When I first wrote this little part didn't exist, and I thought, well, if you're in Beijing, China, and you're reading this, you might not know too much about what's going on or what happened, so maybe the story might be a little nebulous, but here we go. The winds of change were already stirring in Detroit by the mid-1950s. What once blew like a rippling breeze had given rise to a full-blown gale. In 1956, the Detroit chapter of the NAACP was wrapping up its investigation that led to their 1957 report on police brutality in the city. This stems from a decade before, when in June of 1943, a disturbance broke out on a bridge that led to Belle Isle, a city park that sits pastorally in the middle of the Detroit River. The fuse was lit by a series of unclaimed rumors that falsely blamed blacks as well as whites for nefarious actions neither had committed. The counterpart to the rumors was the fact that 34 people were dead and twice as many injured. The NAACP investigation was launched because 25 of the 34 fatalities were black, and 17 of them came at the hands of the police. Another incident in 1956 happened on a Sunday morning in April, when the last streetcar ran its route down Woodward Avenue before screeching to a halt after 93 years of service. In its wake, it left miles of abandoned streetcar tracks jutting out of the pavement like varicose veins. They even had a parade that was more like a funeral procession as the last car's steel wheels click-clacked its way into the Woodward Car House in Highland Park, only to be sold to Mexico City, where they continued to run for decades until an earthquake immobilized them all together. Meanwhile, the Aero Train, a high-speed rail, made its debut, zipping along between Detroit and Chicago. The Packard plant assembled its last sedan in 1956, and then it closed. The sprawling complex was left to slumber on a tree-lined boulevard in an East Side neighborhood across from an A&P supermarket. The shuttered factory became the focus of neighborhood kids walking by and gaping wide-eyed at the dark, dusty windows with both curiosity and trepidation. After a while, the curiosity turned humdrum as the neighborhood got used to the sleeping 40 acres of wasteland. A year or so earlier, the Hudson Motor Plant moved to Kenosha, Wisconsin. Instead of being left like an old cow in a pasture, like the Packard plant was, the Hudson plant was used to produce military vehicles instead of the obsolete Hudson Hornet sedan. Ironically, in spite of two car companies folding, the Interstate Highway Act was signed by President Eisenhower, linking Detroit to Chicago by Interstate 94, Detroit to Lansing by Interstate 96, and northern Michigan all the way down to Florida by Interstate 75. Although the inception of these interstates blew out swaths of neighborhoods, it was the building of I-75 that resulted in the obliteration of an overcrowded neighborhood known as Black Bottom, as well as a hustling area rife with entertainment known as Paradise Valley. Black Bottom was originally named for the dark, fertile soil that the French inhabitants farmed. Except for some of the street names such as DeQuinder, Livernois, Gratiot, Lafayette, the French in Detroit were forgotten. Many black residents lived in Black Bottom because they were not allowed to reside in any other neighborhood, even though they worked side by side with their white counterparts in the city's many factories. Paradise Valley was home to many nightclubs, bars, restaurants, illegal gambling rooms, barbershops, drugstores, soda fountains, and various other businesses. The main artery of Paradise Valley was Hastings Street. Oh, it is often said that one could find just about anything on Hastings. It was hip, vibrant, wanton, cultural. The majority of the businesses were black-owned, offering a tolerant, welcoming hub for music lovers who frequent the Black and Tans, which were mixed black and white clubs that swung with jazz and blues. One factor that made them so popular was that they often extended into all-night jam sessions where headline jazz musicians returning from their more traditional gigs would jam with local musicians in the clubs and various after-hour joints. And there were many fine local musicians all over Paradise Valley, actually all over the city for that matter. Bob White, a local troubadour known as the Detroit Count, would run up and down Hastings Street, bouncing drunkenly in and out of saloons, mainly the ones with a piano, plunking out his boogie-woogie poetic ramble, the Hastings Street Opera. Improvising just about every time he played it. Sometimes he played it with flawless mastery. Other times, played it loose, sloppy, depending on how soon he started drinking that day. He would play for nickels, dimes, quarters, but often just for drinks or a plate of fried chicken and greens. A couple verses from his fabled anthem went like this. Boy, it's all down on Hastings Street. Hendry and Hastings Street, the corner bar. That's the only place you can walk in, get yourself a bottle of beer, turn your head, and somebody else is trying to drink it up. Boy, that's a bad joint. He would then bang out some more boogie-woogie blues licks. Forrest and Hastings, Sonny Wilson, longest bar in town. That's the only bar you can walk in when you get ready to buy a bottle of beer. You have to walk a mile after you get in the joint. And this went on and on and on until he named just about every bar in the neighborhood. If anything, the Detroit Count captured the street's spirit for mischief and excitement. But that was all long ago. Long before the tar and cement buried the valley like the ruins of Pompeii. But what becomes of all that spirit? Where does it go? Does it fade away as the night surrenders to the morning light? Does it hover above in a sort of a purgatory? Perhaps it is a story waiting to be told about a magical time, a time emblazoned in the history of this great city, a story eager to rise out of the ashes of time. Thank you very much. Actually, what you heard, the boogie-woogie ramble, that's the Count. And I've been trying to do some research and find out what happened to that guy. Nothing's really coming up, but I'll do some more digging and we'll see. Because he was a real figure on Hastings. And the only few recordings he has is the one you heard there. And it was pretty rough, but you got to understand the time and the engineering in those days. And he certainly wasn't at Columbia Records when he did that. Okay, I'm going to read a little bit from the opening of chapter 1 to just see how the story really begins. Give you a little reading of the street, as if you're walking down the street in Hastings. And then we'll get to not quite the aftermath, because then you wouldn't have to buy the book. So, the guy read it for us. Thank you. You know, so get your cell phones out and tape it, and then you go, okay, I know what happens. Okay, chapter 1. It is mid-September 1956. The dawn is creeping in with the soft wisp of a cool breeze. The pink sun is spreading across the skyline behind the 47 stories of the Penobscot building that stands tall and firm like a lion, whose silhouette rises proudly against the sky. It is the landmark symbol of the Motor City. Less than a mile east, that same light is falling on Hastings Street. Night slips into day, and with it comes the next wave of faces. The night shift retreats, and the day workers emerge. They are the lifeblood of the Motor City. They are the nucleus, as well as the protoplasm. They are the workers sweating in foundries where the darkness is broken by the glowing fire of molten metal as the embryos of automobiles are being conceived. They are the factory workers on the assembly line, spraying sparks from welding guns, morphing shells of raw metal into the sleek cars of the day. They are the high-low drivers moving pallets all day, coughing in dusty warehouses with no windows. They are the packers, skillfully wielding knives in refrigerated slaughterhouses at the Eastern Market. They are the produce workers unloading 1,000 pallets from boxcars on frozen train tracks. They are the stevedores on the docks operating huge cranes, greeting freighters sweating down in the hold and shivering in the cold river winds. They are the city workers drilling in the streets, working in the sewers, climbing up electric poles. They are the waitresses with sore feet, hustling trays of food through a maze of tables. They are the clerical workers, tapping away madly on typewriters amidst a ringing chorus of telephones. They are the custodians mopping floors, their ears buzzing from the hum of a whirring vacuum cleaner. And these are just a sample of the workers that make up this great working city. They are Detroit. Then there are the gray-flanneled, white-collared workers, bank clerks, auto executives, businessmen, salesmen, necktie attorneys who are also scrambling to work. They are either charging through the streets in their Cadillacs and Lincolns if they can afford one, Chryslers, Chevys, Pontiacs, Mercurys, or they're humbly chugging along in Studebakers and ashes. Those without cars are huddled at the bus stops, anxiously shuffling their feet and smoking cigarettes, awaiting the DSR bus now that the streetcars are gone. This group has one thing in common. They all know the ring of an alarm clock and the stillness of a dark, early workaday morning. This group moves with the sunlight, unlike the Hastings Street crowd that moves with the night. Well, this particular morning was like any other in Hastings. The musicians are packing up. The gamblers are counting their wins and losses. And the working girls were looking for a ride home via a cab or from their pimps. Some of the waiters and the bartenders were having an after-work drink in a blind pig. And yes, there were some who lived in both worlds. They were the ones who lingered for the night before. The ones who just could not seem to give up the night. They wanted to grab hold of the mystery and promise of it and savor every moment. Perhaps they wanted one more card game, or one last drink in an after-hours joint, or one last romp on a creaky bed in a cheap hotel with a woman who is watching the clock out of one eye and counting the evening's cash out of the other. Sort of opens the book. The funny thing about doing a reading from this, I started it out as a play, so there's a lot of dialogue. And initially, when I did my first reading, we actually did like a staged reading, gave everybody a script, and we stood up, and he played this part, I played that one, I played this one. I was going to read the Hamtramck part of this, because in the novel, the Hastings Street gang, as I'll call them, are warring with the Hamtramck boys over numbers. And I was going to do that scene, but I needed 3-4 other people to play the other parts, and it just didn't happen. So now you don't have to buy the book. Okay, here's a typical afternoon. Typical afternoon in Hastings Street. A steady rain began to fall that morning. By noon, it slowed to a trickle and then it stopped altogether. A warm September sun emerged as Hastings Street awakened with people hitting the streets, filling up the shops, restaurants, and bars. At the Blue Swan, Louis had just finished placing the liquor order and beer orders for the week. He bid Mike the bartender farewell and left, stepping out for a stroll. He was greeted by the usual sounds coming out of the bars, that being jazz, mainly bop. But now, there was another sound that was becoming more and more popular, blues. All up and down the street, the blues of Muddy Waters, Little Walter, Howlin' Wolf, and other Chess Records artists began blaring out of jukeboxes. Electric blues guitars began filling the rooms of some of the former jazz clubs in the neighborhood. John Lee Hooker, a local Chrysler assembly line worker who was beginning to make a name for himself in the clubs with his tune, Boogie Chillin', was gaining popularity now with his boogie guitar and bluesy growl. Other Detroiters like Bobo Jenkins, Johnny Bassett, Alberta Adams were catching fire on the blues scene as well. Blues had moved from the southern delta, the lonesome sharecropper moan of the cotton fields, was being transformed into a sound that was more urbane, slick, and electric. Its pulse was a walking bass behind a spirited guitar, a tinkling piano, a wailing harmonica, and occasionally a deep honking sax. Some of the music had the cool rush of a Cadillac sporting its way through the streets, coupled with all the funky grit of a backroom poker game in a blind pit. One song in particular was Honky Tonk by Bill Doggett. His muscular tenor on that tune was blowing strong on jukeboxes all over Paradise Valley. A couple miles away at Fortune Records on 3rd Avenue, Nolan Strong and the Diablos had recently recorded The Way You Dog Me Around, and it was filling the rooms of every local bar as well. About this time, a lot of new local recordings were made in the back room of Bo Don Riddle's record store, across from the Blue Swan. Bo would then send the freshly recorded records out through a horn-shaped speaker mounted above his shop's door that would spill music out to the busy street for all to groove on. As Louis strolled down Hastings in the pleasant autumn air, he peeked into the big window of the Lightfoot barber shop. Already it was full to capacity. With no seats left, the men milled around, telling their animated stories. High atop everyone in the shoe shine seat sat the prominent businessman, Snooky Wharton. Now, Snooky owned the Mark Twain Hotel on Garfield off of Woodward, where he kept 2 luxury suites reserved for celebrities and dignitaries who might want a room away from the hum of Hastings Street, yet only a stone's throw away from the Flame Show Bar on Campfield and John R. He also owned Snooky's Gardens on Hastings and Forest with its 107-foot bar, which was billed as the longest bar in the world. It wasn't the longest in the world, it was the longest in Detroit anyway. Clarence the Shoeshine Kid buffed away at Snooky's shoes with his skinny, unlit Dutch Master cigar clenched tightly in his teeth as he hummed Nat King Cole's Route 66 and occasionally broke out into a little shimmy dance that usually yielded him some big tips. Moving around the room was the mayor of Paradise Valley, Big Royce Bigelow, owner of the El Sino Club on St. Antoine Street. He's passing out flyers. He was heralded with the new position of mayor on account of the recent informal elections, and he beamed with pride. All down the street, the smell of freshly cooked ribs wafted out of the fat brick chimney of Dot's Barbecue. People patiently waited in line for their orders as others sat at tables. Dot, or Mama D as they called her, was known for her delicious meats, greens, and home-baked peach cobbler. Her simple formula kept the little restaurant buzzing from noon until 2 in the morning when she closed. Some of the bars left their doors open, allowing the warm September air in and the cigarette smoke out. From the Congo Club, the low murmuring of patrons carried out into the street with the occasional jukebox honk of Little Walter's wailing harmonica. As glasses clinked and laughter rang out. Louis decided to stop in at Sport Tree's music bar. When he stepped in, he was greeted by the voice of Ruth Brown on the jukebox singing, "Mama, he treats your daughter mean." He scanned the room, didn't see anyone he knew, beside the bartender, and sat beside a chocolate brown-skinned woman of about 30. She stared dreamily into her drink as she stirred it, sadly shaking her head. She began glancing in the mirror at herself with a broken half-smile, patting her well-coiffed hair. He imagined that she must have played that Ruth Brown song. She was trying to forget something or someone. He turned to talk to her about the pleasant weather. Good opening line, he thought. But before he could speak, she downed her drink, took $1 out of her purse, laid it on the bar, and walked out. So he ordered a shell of beer, sipped it in his stead, chatted with the bartender about the pleasant weather. Since his usual night shift had not yet begun, Louis dedicated this time for his numbers duties. That meant a quick visit to the racetrack to get the numbers of the winning numbers and then back to the Gotham Hotel to report the number slips to Mac Bird, the numbers boss. Thank you. I really would like to read a section in here of what I call the party, where the announcement of Hastings Street is made. You got to understand, when this first happened, not everybody knew about it. It didn't hit the papers. As a matter of fact, I went to the library, Burton Historical section in the main library, which is a pretty interesting place if you've never been there. You got to give them ID and they kind of check you out and everything, and then you can go look at stuff. Or they just won't let you walk in there and, oh, I'm going to look at this, because it's some valuable stuff. So I got the original clippings from the Detroit Times, which is no longer in existence, the Free Press, and the News announcing that Hastings Street was going to be turned into a freeway. That was in late '56. But this is September and the word's not out yet. So only the chosen few know. So Jimmy Crutchfield, if any of you have your breakdown, Jimmy Crutchfield Jimmy Crawford. He originally was Jimmy Crutchfield, a Negro League All-Star who was an outfielder. And in the novel, he buys the Blue Swan. And he's one of the first people to know that this is going on. And most of the people who come to this party have no idea what they're about to hear. And like I said, I have to, this is on the spur of the moment, because normally I was not going to read this part because it gets into dialogue, and that gets a little hard since there's only a few of us. Well, a few, it's only me. I don't have a cast of characters here who can read for me. So again, I will let you read the book. Well, anyways, I'm going to take you into another, what I would say, emotional moment. Jimmy has not been back to the old neighborhood in a long time. He bought his new bar, which is up on Linwood, which is where a lot of these folks moved from. They went up to Linwood, 12th Street, Dexter. I guess at the time they called it the Northwest Side, but I really wasn't. When you think Northwest, you're thinking 7 Livernois, Myers, etc., etc. But some people consider that the Northwest Side, depending on where you're from. So Jimmy has a new bar now. He hasn't been down to the old one. And he decides he's going to go down to the old neighborhood and have a look. Before he knew it, he was driving his Cadillac through a light drizzle toward Paradise Valley, or what was once Paradise Valley. The wipers hypnotically clicked across the windshield, and he drove the rest of the way as if in a trance. He had not seen the old neighborhood in almost 2 years, and he did not know what to expect. By the time he arrived downtown, rain was reduced to a mist. On a deserted Beaubien Street south of Adams, he pulled his car up behind an abandoned pushcart that sat sadly in the empty street. Somehow it made its way across the ditch, all the way over from Eastern Market. He grabbed his umbrella, stepped out of his Cadillac, and walked down Adams toward what was once Hastings. By now, the light rain had stopped altogether, and the sky began to clear. At first, he felt numb, looking at the open spaces and the earth and the moist dirt that once supported the buildings. He could feel his heart beginning to pound and the blood coursing through his veins all the way up to his scalp. A single ray of sunlight peered from one bloated cloud that hung in the sky. Jimmy closed his umbrella and looked up for the rainbow, but there was none to be found. Behind him, the orange ray of evening sun was slowly sinking before the call of night. He could see the ditch at the end of the street. When he got to the foot of Adams, he looked down into the muddy hole. There were bulldozers and backhoes and tractors just sitting there abandoned. The workmen had gone home and were eating supper or playing with their children or sitting in a bar sopping beer and wiping the frothy foam from their lips with the back of their shirt sleeves. Or bowling in some smoky bowling alley, howling and guffawing through the din of bowling balls, crashing into wooden pins. Meanwhile, equipment in the ditch sat lifeless in the mud. The machines, however, did not seem so sinister now as they did when the men boarded them and smashed down the structures and tore into the earth, transforming the neighborhood into something unrecognizable, as if a war had blown it away. He looked at the corner where his bar, his beloved Blue Swan, once stood, and he could see the cars whizzing by on Gratiot. This seemed odd. This was something he had never seen before. The red brick bulk of the Stroh Brewery in the near distance struck him as an odd sight as well. There was no Lightfoot barber shop, no Bose record shop, no Dot's barbecue, no Barthwell's drugstore and ice cream parlor. When he looked south, there was no Sportree's music bar, no Horseshoe bar. When he looked north, there was no Warfield Theater, nor Willis Theater, no Coney Corner, no Forest Club, no Snooky's Gardens. Nothing but a ditch. Even the steeple of St. Josephat on Cantfield stood lonely and lugubrious in the early evening sky. There was no music, only the lonely sound of the wind. There were no waiters, bartenders, there were no dancers, barbers, shoe shines, numbers people, store jerks, soda jerks, or hustlers. The patrons who came to Hastings to refresh themselves and enjoy the nightlife, trying to escape from the doldrums of their working class lives, they'd been run out and taken over by the lifeless ditch. Instead of all the activity that once vibrated through Hastings, only the wind blew through the wide open space where cars and trucks would rumble over the concrete in pursuit of their destinations, totally unaware of the displaced souls and the buried memories. Keep moving, keep pushing onward to some other area, the wind seemed to cry. Move on to some other neighborhood where black faces would be comfortable and not have to excuse themselves for being a part of the city too. Who are these men who sit in these padded leather chairs in their high-rise offices above the city, gazing below out of windows, making decisions that weigh heavily over the heads of the average citizen? After such meetings, they make elaborate lunch plans of steak and martini afternoons. But there was nothing that could be done. Decisions were made. One must move on. Jimmy stood looking into the ditch as if it were a grave. Morning should be short-lived, he told himself. Just move on. Do not stand and weep over Pompeii. But what about the countless names and faces out there somewhere, he thought. Where was the Count? What piano was he banging on now? Had he left town? The only answer he received was the wind whispering in his ears. There was always tomorrow and the next day and the day after that. Life would continue in spite of all this, Jimmy reasoned. But before his eyes was only the ditch. That is all that was left of a time, a culture, a neighborhood, business, a way of life, a breath, a heartbeat. The bands had packed up. Their horns had fallen silent. The stoves in the restaurant kitchens went cold. The drinks stopped pouring, and the dance was over. All that was left was the ditch. Thank you. If you want my opinion, and I've been to numerous readings. I think that's pretty much right there, okay? If folks are going, hey, I drove 10 miles to come here, I'll read you some more. But I think we might want to play a little music for you guys. And what we're going to do here is, if you went to the Blue Swan back in 1956, these are a couple songs you might hear. All right. One little exception, my good friend James Knoll here is going to be playing his washtub bass. They weren't really playing them in those days. That's more jug band music. I'd say more of a southern thing. But he does it so elaborately well that we're going to bring a washtub into the Blue Swan. My other good friend, Donnie Kirkland here, on his wonderful guitar. Let's give it up for these guys. Yeah, man. So let's have a couple songs, and then you can have some more refreshments, and I'll sign some books, and all is well. And if by chance you care to, the unofficial after reading party is at Susie's Bar on Eveline, just a hair that way of Joseph Campo. We'll tell you all about that later. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for listening to my reading and being enlightened with these wonderful videos that was made by this gentleman, Greg, here, who's on camera. Thank you, Greg. I couldn't have done it without you. I found these videos, strangely enough, on YouTube, and he and I kind of collaborated, and he did this marvelous job of putting this little, I guess you would call, movie together. So without further ado, we're going to play some songs, all right?
Just so cold. I'm going back to the border where I'm better known. I ain't done nothing but to draft a good man from his home. way. I'm gonna ride that old highway up to the break of day. I got the key to the highway. Yeah, baby, I'm set and gone. 'Cause you ain't done nothing but drive a good man from his home. Thank you all for coming out, ladies and gentlemen. I'll be